Welcome to Law and Society. Today we're going to talk about the Posse Comitatus Act. So before I go into talking about the Posse Comitatus Act, I just want to update on a few news stories that I think are important. So this man that I admire, Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of our times, is stepping down from Berkshire Hathaway. And when he was asked about what's going on with the economic turmoil in the world, he said that trade should not be a weapon. You know, his words are simple and they are powerful. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing now. He's weaponizing trade and in doing so, alienating allies. He's alienating adversaries like China who are trade partners, but he's actually alienating allies by using trade against countries like Canada and the European Union, and it is detrimental to commerce. It's detrimental to the growth of society. So that's one piece. The second thing I wanted to sort of talk about, and then that would lead into today's main topic, is in the interview with Donald Trump, Kristen Welker asked him, "Don't you need to uphold the Constitution as president?" And Donald Trump says, "I don't know." So Donald Trump, as I've always said, has a reckless disregard for the rule of law. And now he displays his disdain for the rule of law by openly, essentially saying, "I don't know if I have to uphold my oath of office." Because his oath of office is to uphold the Constitution of the United States. His constitutional duty is to carry out, to faithfully to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. But he's not doing that. Instead, he's going into building a police state. And I've been talking about this police state now for the 5th episode because it is important for us to remember and important for us to see where we're going. We have to remember the past of what has been happening over the last 100 days, and then we have to see which direction we are going in. And I believe the direction that we're going in is Donald Trump establishing a police state. I think his birthday parade is sort of a kickoff of that because it is happening right in the middle of Donald Trump's assessment of what he can do in terms of using national resources, military resources to aid state government. So I'll read you the excerpts really quickly from the executive orders, and then I'll go and talk to you and read you about the Posse Comitatus Act, which many have said that Donald Trump can't really take the military and put him on the streets. It doesn't. It violates the Posse Comitatus Act. And for the longest time, I didn't really look into what the Posse Comitatus Act said because the phrase Posse Comitatus just sounds so ostentatious, and I just didn't want to, I don't know. But anyway, I want to first go and remind you about what I'm talking about, which is the executive orders for the police state that Donald Trump is building. Excerpts from them. Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall determine how military national security assets, training, non-lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime. He's talking about crime in states and local places, and I've talked about that. Now, the question with the Posse Comitatus Act is how can, essentially the question to Pam Bondi and Pete Hegseth's administration or departments are how can the military evade the Posse Comitatus Act? And there are many exceptions to it, as you will see coming up. Next excerpt. For states and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws, sanctuary jurisdictions, government shall identify appropriate federal funds to sanctuary jurisdictions, including grants and contracts for suspension or termination as appropriate. Now, first of all, he doesn't have the money to take away federally funded, congressionally approved, and appropriated funding. That's number one. Number two, he's going after these jurisdictions that are getting in the way of Donald Trump illegally seizing and depriving residents of those jurisdictions of due process of law. States and local authorities have a duty to the Constitution of the United States, just as much as federal officials do. Their oaths of office come with the Constitution of the United States and the laws of their jurisdictions. And so they are getting in the way of Donald Trump breaking the law, and Donald Trump with this executive order, which, by the way, is not law. It's a policy statement of how he's directing his government to go about doing things. He talks about sanctuary jurisdictions. Government shall identify and terminate their contracts. So that's weaponizing his ability to execute the laws. He's not taking care to faithfully execute the laws. He's taking care to get in between the laws and their execution and find reasons to not execute the law. Execute the law includes both the Immigration Act compliance as well as due process compliance. But guess what? The Constitution doesn't require compliance with an executive order. That's not law. The third excerpt that I want to read you before going into the Posse Comitatus Act is: the Attorney General shall provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers. Now, law enforcement officers will become a loosely used term when you start thinking about it in the terms of how they would expand personnel when they can't really add any military other than the National Guard to law enforcement duties. So, the law enforcement officer bit is sort of like, who do you deputize? Remember, the Posse Comitatus Act only applies to the federal government, only applies to, how the federal government operates with states and local authorities. And sort of what he's going to do is find ways to evade the Posse Comitatus Act, and he's going to try and find ways to deputize militia groups who will be trained with law enforcement and will become para-law enforcement, and they will be indemnified for what Donald Trump says unjustly incur expenses and liabilities for actions during the performance of their official duties to enforce the law. Now he's talking about the law that his executive order presumes to be, not the law of following due process and not the law of any sort of legitimate immigration policy deportation, because that is clear and simple. You go to the courts. You don't hide or you don't cover yourself cloak yourself with the power of the Alien Enemies Act, which one court has already said does not apply in this situation, and then you talk about enforcing the law. This mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for law enforcement officers. So that is the private sector lawyers that Donald Trump has been able to blackmail and intimidate and coerce into contracts, essentially giving him millions of dollars in pro bono services. That might be in jeopardy now with, Perkins Coie winning one of the cases when it came to providing those services. So we'll see how that happens and what pro bono services he employs. But private sector pro bono services to provide law enforcement, to provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers can come from from lawyers who have represented the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. The way that the Secretary of Defense, as you will see, can evade going about sending the military in person is to train and give them resources that evade the Posse Comitatus law and essentially weaponize the police force of the states and local authorities, who can then go and get other pro bono services to help them out, or who can deputize others who can help them out. And Donald Trump is very not so subtly pointing to that as well, because the news now, Scott MacFarlane of CBS reports that White House officials confirm that Trump had conversation last night with Enrique Tarrio at Mar-a-Lago last night as Trump was walking to his dinner table. On social media, Tarrio said Trump told him to thank the January 6ers. So you can see, I can see a mobilization happening on various levels in order to really choke the population and the citizenry of compliant jurisdictions who are not going to resist Donald Trump's illegal occupation of removing whoever he thinks are criminals and providing them no due process of law. With that said, I'm going to go and read you what first of all, Posse Comitatus, it's a Latin thing that means, in common law, a group of people mobilized to suppress lawlessness, to defend the people, or otherwise protect the place, property, and public welfare. Okay? And so the Posse Comitatus Act stops the government from going into states in order to create these posses that were legally deputized to go out and enforce the law and suppress lawlessness. So the pertinent part of the law says, from and after the passage of this act, it shall not be lawful, so it would be unlawful, to employ any part of the Army of the United States. This has subsequently been expanded to other military departments as a posse comitatus or otherwise for the purpose of executing the laws, except in such cases and under such circumstances as such employment of said force may expressly be authorized by the Constitution or act of Congress. And so Donald is already wrapping himself up in Alien Enemies Act. He's going to wrap himself up in foreign policy's power. he's going to wrap himself up in emergency of crime happening. And then there are the exceptions that are generally accepted, like, providing general criminal counterintelligence investigations when there's a nexus, there's a relationship to a particular military branch conducted by civilian agents of certain independent military investigative agencies, such as surveillance and intelligence, essentially a surveillance state. That is not covered under the PCA. Can't keep saying Posse Comitatus. And so, under another law, the president can use the National Guard while not federalized in its law enforcement capacity. And he can do so at any time he wants in D.C. because he's the one who controls the National Guard of D.C. And without federalizing, he can use National Guard for law enforcement capacity under 32 U.S.C. Section 502F. You can look up the laws. You can just go to the Wikipedia and then go to the sources from the Wikipedia. That's where you want to start. That's what encyclopedias are for. You read the information, then you go to the original sources that are referred to in the footnotes, and then you see the source and you read what's in the source. And so then under another law, 10 U.S.C. Section 284, military may provide surveillance, intelligence gathering, observation, and equipment for domestic law enforcement on operations such as drug interdiction and counterterrorism missions. Why do you think Donald has been framing this whole thing on crimes and drug cartels to begin with? Whether there is any truth to the ones he's detaining on the basis of that or not. He's clearly not removing 2, 4, and 7-year-olds on the basis of those emergencies. He's giving those parents a choice within the hour, within 24 hours, to decide whether to leave their children behind or take their children if these people are, as Donald's government and regime are saying, undocumented or illegal aliens. They are owed due process of law, and their children are definitely owed due process of law. They are citizens of the United States, and as wardens of citizens of the United States, these parents must also have rights of at least due process. Even Scalia said, Antonin Scalia, one of the most conservative justices to have sort of roared from the bench, who would now be a moderate, it seems, said that everybody gets due process of law. So remember when Donald Trump throws all these things at where he's getting his powers from, what the exceptions and evasions are to the Posse Comitatus Act, because there already are holes in that net that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi and the Department of Defense's loyalists can employ. And I'm sure Stephen Miller will have a big role to play in it, and Donald Trump already thinks that he's qualified because he has a lot of things to say about a lot of things. So that's where we are. I wanted to read you the important section of that, and then sort of remind you that Donald Trump is well on his way to a police state. And as much as I hate to do this, I'm going to do it. It's the first time that I've done this, because it is important that you learn how all of this is connected. And I wouldn't have read this whole thing but for one word. So this is Donald Trump on Truth Social. Rebuild and open Alcatraz. Alcatraz is an infamous prison on an island in the San Francisco Bay that was closed years ago, and now it is going to be opened again. He can do that if it's a federal thing. It was a federal prison. He can do whatever he wants with it. For too long, America has been plagued by vicious, violent, and repeat criminal offenders, the dredges of society, who will never contribute anything other than misery and suffering. When we were a more serious nation in times past, we did not hesitate to lock up the most dangerous criminals and keep them far away from anyone they could harm. Okay? That's the way it's supposed to be. No longer will we tolerate these serial offenders who spread filth, bloodshed, and mayhem on our streets. No idea exactly who he's talking about, but he's talking about criminal offenders, and that is the general language that he has talked about in his executive orders, going after crime, criminal offenders. That is why today I am directing the Bureau of Prisons, together with the Department of Justice, FBI, and Homeland Security, to reopen a substantially enlarged and rebuild Alcatraz to house America's most ruthless and violent offenders. Okay? We will no longer be held hostages to criminals, thugs, and judges that are afraid to do their job and allow us to remove criminals who came into our country illegally. The reopening of Alcatraz will serve as a symbol of law, order, and justice. We will make America great again. So, do you know which word made me read the whole thing? I suppose it would be a phrase. Judges. I'll read that again. We will no longer be held hostages. We will no longer be held hostage to criminals, thugs, and judges that are afraid to do their job and allow us to remove criminals. Mind you, he's basing this on the people, criminals, who he has not provided due process of law, who one of his appointed judges said cannot be detained or deported or removed without due process of law based on the Alien Enemies Act, who the Supreme Court has said do have habeas corpus claims in the jurisdiction of their detention, and they were illegally removed. What about them? They need to be brought back, or at least be put in constructive and actual U.S. custody so that they remain in U.S. jurisdiction. But now he's talking about opening Alcatraz, and he's talking about criminal offenders generally, repeat violent offenders, criminals, thugs, and judges that are afraid to do their job and allow us to remove criminals. I mean, that just really tells you what he has in mind. He's not only going to go after these people, and we're seeing he's going after citizens, American citizens, traumatizing a whole Oklahoma family of American citizens, and not being able to thankfully drag them away, because I believe one of the kids in the household knew what their rights were. So, and the fact that they were U.S. citizens and talks about it while their house was being ransacked, really, put a wrench in that plan. But now that information is public, and don't think that won't happen more, because that's what the executive order says, and it was dated April 28th, given 90 days to figure out what to do, how to evade the Posse Comitatus Act, how to implement and get the resources and, training skills to the local enforcement jurisdictions that will comply with this executive order. You'll see a flight from these jurisdictions. You'll see an increase in other jurisdictions where there are sanctuary jurisdictions, and so Donald Trump goes after them as well. Think about these things. Read about this. Go and read those two executive orders from April 28, 2025. It's on Donald Trump's executive orders, executive actions on his website. And I've provided the links many times in the previous videos. So go and read about the Posse Comitatus Act and read the fact as we slow walk into a police state dictatorship of somebody who doesn't know if he has to uphold the Constitution. His lawyers will be able to do that. His lawyers are brilliant, and his lawyers will be able to take care of that. Skirting responsibility when he's actually the one directing everything that's happening. That is clear. His mind works in a diabolical way. And we are less than 3 months or less than 4 months away from a police state where you will see military on your streets, in your neighborhood, around the block, in parking malls, at grocery stores. And that's how life will just become. And Donald Trump will try to hang it on his emergency powers of, criminals and crime and this invasion of Tren de Aragua and other criminal gangs, terrorist organizations. And then, of course, it'll go through the courts. And as we're seeing now, Abrego Garcia's case is going through the courts. But the poor man is still suffering and been there for months, for over a month. And he's suffering in cruel and unusual environment along with Andrew Romero, Merwin Gutierrez, and so many others, hundreds and hundreds of others, who need to be returned. And Donald Trump is not listening to that indirect SCOTUS order. Because what SCOTUS did was not what SCOTUS did in the ACLU and the AARP case, where he stopped the removal in its tracks at 1 a.m. and a 7-2 ruling saying that these people shall not be removed under this act. And the class, the putative class of these people who fall under the Alien Enemies Act, in this case, cannot be removed. And the government complied with that direct order. But the government did not comply with the order in the Abrego Garcia case, where the court remanded it to Judge Zinnes again, and Judge Zinnes has to now deal with them in discovery, where they are stonewalling at every step Judge Zinnes' order to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia to a jurisdiction where he can get due process of law. And of course, this does not include any sort of immigration violation that he has made. He used to report to ICE every year. So if he violated the Immigration Naturalization Act or the immigration, custom, and border policies that he was supposed to comply with, they would know. He was already under the eye of the immigration apparatus. So with that said, I've already gone to 30 minutes. Thank you for listening to me. Please share and subscribe. It really helps me out. Liking, if you like what you hear, would be great. Your comments are awesome because I can interact with you. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll talk to you soon.